My name is Marlowe Ashby, and I'm 28 years old. Pack your things and don't come back until you've come to your senses." My father's voice didn't crack. It never did. He said it the way he said everything, flat, controlled, final, like he was reading off a chart in one of his exam rooms. I stood in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, my hands still smelling like the eucalyptus oil from the skincare samples I'd been mixing in my apartment the night before, and I watched him set down his coffee cup with a precision that scared me more than yelling ever could have. My mother stood by the sink, drying a plate that was already dry, refusing to look at me. My younger brother, Silas, sat frozen at the kitchen table, a spoon halfway to his mouth, eyes darting between our father and me like he was watching something break in slow motion. They were disowning me for quitting dental school. For years of my life spent memorizing occlusion patterns and root canal procedures, for years of my father telling every patient in his practice about his daughter, the future partner, the one who was going to take over Ashby Family Dental when he retired. And I had ended all of it with one letter to the university, withdrawing in my final semester, 3 months before graduation. What none of them knew, standing in that kitchen with its smell of my mother's burnt toast and my father's cold disappointment, was that I had spent the last 2.5 years quietly building something of my own. It started with $340 and a borrowed sewing machine, mixing small batches of a face oil in my dorm room because my roommate's eczema wouldn't respond to anything from a pharmacy, and mine did. I sold it to 12 people the first month. Then 40. Then I stopped counting because the numbers stopped meaning anything except more work. I hadn't told my family because I knew exactly how my father would respond. He would ask about the margins. He would ask about the liability insurance. He would find some way to make my small, strange, growing thing sound like a hobby that was distracting me from what mattered. So I kept it quiet. I kept it so quiet that when I told him I was leaving dental school, I didn't mention the brand at all. I just said it wasn't for me anymore, that I couldn't spend my life with my hands in other people's mouths when everything in me wanted to build something that was mine. He didn't ask what I meant by building something. He just told me to pack my things. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, though my chest felt like it had been wrapped in wire. I nodded, walked past my mother without a word, and carried my one suitcase out to my car, a dented Toyota Corolla that had survived 4 years of commuting to labs and lectures I no longer believed in. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I turned the key, watching my breath fog up the window in the cold, listening to the sound of my father's front door closing behind me, quiet and certain, like something being filed away. I drove 3 hours that night to the small warehouse space I'd leased under a company name my family had never heard, Hollow Bloom Skincare, and I slept on a cot between pallets of glass bottles until the sun came up. I didn't feel like I'd lost a family that night. I felt, for the first time in years, like I had finally stopped holding my breath. By then, Hollow Bloom wasn't the dorm room operation it used to be. It hadn't happened overnight, the way people like to imagine these things happen. It happened in the space between exam blocks, in the hours I was supposed to be sleeping before rotations, in every gap of time my classmates spent decompressing and I spent labeling bottles and answering customer emails from a shared kitchen table. I taught myself formulation chemistry from journal articles I found through the university library, the same database I was supposed to be using for pharmacology papers. I taught myself how to read a spreadsheet, how to negotiate with a co-packer, how to talk to a distributor twice my age without letting my voice shake. Nobody handed me any of it. I built it the way you build something when quitting isn't a real option because you never let yourself imagine quitting as a possibility. A private equity scout had found the brand through a wellness newsletter 8 months earlier. And what began as one email turned into a formal offer that made my accountant go quiet on the phone for almost 30 seconds before he said a number that I made him repeat twice. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment after that call, back against the refrigerator, staring at nothing, trying to make the number feel real, and it didn't, not for days. I signed the deal 2 weeks after my father told me not to come back. I didn't celebrate. I sat alone in my warehouse office and read the contract 3 times, and then I called my operations manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ines Calloway, and told her I was ready to build the next phase without looking over my shoulder anymore. 6 months later, I moved into a house on the bluffs outside Portland, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water, a place I had closed on quietly the year before and left empty, furnished but unlived in, waiting for a version of me that finally felt ready to live in it. I stood in the living room the first night with the lights off, watching the water go dark, and for the first time since that kitchen, I let myself breathe all the way out. I thought that house was the end of the story. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, a single phone call would pull my father back into my life in a way neither of us saw coming, and force me to decide who I actually wanted to be when no one would ever know it was me. I told no one in my family where I'd gone. No forwarding address, no calls, no explanation. I wanted the kind of distance that lets a person figure out who they actually are without a lifetime of other voices telling them who they're supposed to be. But distance has a way of closing in on you when you least expect it. And on a gray afternoon in late October, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. My brother Silas. He told me our father's practice was in trouble. A former associate had filed a malpractice suit that the insurance only partially covered, and between the settlement and years of overextending on a new building he'd built to look successful, the practice was drowning. Silas said our mother had stopped sleeping. He said the bank had sent a letter about the house. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't even know what I did for a living anymore. He just wanted someone in the family to know, because he was scared, and because despite 3 years of silence, I was still his sister. I didn't answer right away. I let it sit with me for 2 full days, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's living underneath. On the 3rd day, I called Ines and asked her to quietly set up a debt transfer through Hollow Bloom's holding company, something clean, something routed through a legal entity that couldn't be traced back to my name without real effort. I wasn't ready to drive back to that house. I wasn't ready to hand my father the satisfaction of being right about anything he'd ever said to me. But I also wasn't willing to let my mother lie awake doing math on the kitchen table while the bank circled. Some choices aren't about forgiveness. They're about who you decide to be, even when the person who hurt you will never know it was you. 3 weeks after the transfer went through, the malpractice settlement was resolved and the practice's debt was cleared in full. My father, from what Silas told me later, spent almost 2 days trying to figure out who had paid it, calling the bank, calling his lawyer, convinced someone had made a mistake, until his lawyer finally told him the truth. The funds had come from a company called Hollow Bloom Holdings. My father, a man who reads everything twice, who had signed off on hundreds of insurance documents over 30 years of practice, sat at his desk and typed the name into a search engine. He didn't call me that day. He didn't call the next day either. It took him almost 3 weeks to work up whatever it required for a man like him to dial a number he deleted out of his phone in anger. When my screen lit up with his name for the first time in over 3 years, my hands actually shook before I picked up. His voice was different than I remembered. Quieter. Worn down at the edges in a way that 30 years of dental chairs and mortgage payments hadn't managed to do. He didn't apologize right away, because men like my father don't know how to do that easily, but he asked me questions he had never once asked me before. How I built it. What it actually was. Why I never told him. I told him the truth. I told him I didn't say anything because I already knew the exact shape his disappointment would take, and I couldn't survive shrinking myself down again just to make him comfortable at his own dinner table. There was a long silence on the line. I sat there gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white, half expecting him to take it back, the way he used to take back anything soft the moment it left his mouth. He didn't. He said something I never once heard him say to me in 28 years. He said he was proud of me. And he was sorry. 2 words that had never existed in the same sentence in our house, not once, not for anything. I didn't say anything back right away. I just sat there on my balcony and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the night he closed that door. We didn't fix everything in that phone call. Trust doesn't rebuild that fast, and I wasn't interested in pretending it did just because his voice had gone soft. But we started talking again, carefully, the way people do when they're relearning each other from the beginning. He drove out to see the house on the bluffs last month, the first time he'd seen anything I'd built with my own hands, and he stood at the windows for a long time without saying anything, watching the water the way I had that first night alone, and I think, for the first time, he finally understood what I'd built without him standing over my shoulder telling me how to build it. I don't know exactly where this goes from here. I don't know if we'll ever be what a father and daughter are supposed to be to each other. But I'm not shrinking myself down to fit inside his expectations anymore, and for the first time in my life, neither of us is pretending that doesn't matter. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth until it cost them something, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories just like mine.